All right, it's 7 o'clock. We're going to get started. I know a few more people will be joining us. Good evening, and thank you for your interest in this new and very powerful civil rights project from Frontline, Unresolved. You're going to hear about the genesis and the components of the project, and then we'll devote most of the time to a walkthrough of related classroom resources, helping your students learn and grapple with America's legacy of racist killings. We are recording this evening. You'll receive the links to the recording, a link to a resource document that captures all of the URLs that we'll be referencing this evening, and the slides tomorrow in an email that comes out from Zoom and me, Carolyn Jacobs, in the evening. And we have Angelica in the background who will be posting links in the chat and keeping tabs on your comments in the chat box. I'm Carolyn Jacobs in GBH Education in Boston. And building on tonight's, I'm just moving my slide here. Building on tonight's presentation is a panelist conversation at the NCSS virtual conference next month. NCSS, for those of you who are not familiar, is the National Council for Social Studies, and their annual conference will be virtual in November. So this session right now is kind of will be built on by a panelist conversation that we're having in the conference next month. In that panel session, which is called Shining a Light on a Dark Past, will be the presenters you meet this evening, as well as 3 others, including the co-founder and the executive director of the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation, Deborah Watts. So look for that. You'll learn more about the NCSS conference in a minute or two from an NCS person, Ashante. We are hosted by GBH Education and GBH Boston's public media station, and the co-producer and co-founder of PBS LearningMedia, which we hope is your go-to site for digital resources to support your instruction. Resources there are thousands of them, and they address standards. They are appropriate for K-12 across the curriculum, but we are very, very strong in social studies. And PBS LearningMedia is where, when all the unresolved resources are published, you will find them. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Ashante Horton, who is the manager of meetings and conferences for NCSS, and she has a couple of words of welcome.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm so delighted to be here, and NCSS was so delighted to take part of this webinar collaboration. As Carolyn said, this is kind of like a good preview for one of the programs that we will have at the conference that we're super excited about, and I hope if any of you all are NCSS, have been on the NCSS email list, you probably saw something come out about that. But as you can see, our virtual conference is taking place November 15th through the 21st. So, if you're interested after this program, especially to try to see more about what's going on with Frontline and Unresolved, just tune into the conference. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ashante. And you're being very modest about the not only the unresolved session, but all the other wonderful sessions and the keynote speakers that you have. It's a very impressive list, so I encourage everybody to go check it out. And the presentations will all be virtual, of course, and then available several months after the conference for viewing. All right, our presenters this evening are fittingly very familiar with the project Unresolved. Sue Wilkins, excuse me a second. had my notes in a different order. Yeah, I'm going to start with Erika. Erika is an impact producer with Frontline. She joined Frontline from POV American documentary, where she served as the senior director of station marketing and audience engagement. Alysha Butler is a high school social studies teacher in DC, and she's been teaching for about 20 years. And she recently joined GBH Education as Senior Manager, Inclusive Social Studies Curriculum. And we are thrilled to have her with us. She is responsible for a lot of the resources that you're going to see this evening. She's leading a lot of the development of them. And Sue Wilkins, after teaching for 20 years, Sue worked as the Director of Education for the International Museum of World War II in Natick, Massachusetts. And then she came to GBH Education a few years ago as Director of Social Studies Curriculum and Instruction. I wanted to make a note that we're thrilled to have you, and we know you're going to have a lot to see and think about, but you're also going to be asked to participate a lot. Alysha has many opportunities to gather your reactions and feedback so that you can share things in the chat and learn from each other. So I encourage you to be very active. So after these very brief introductions, Sue is going to come on and give a little preview of the new U.S. history collection on PBS LearningMedia that is coming soon. Then Erika will come on camera and give us the background and the components of the Unresolved project, followed by Alysha, who will take the lion's share of the time going through the resources, very exciting, that are coming, and strategies on using Unresolved in the classroom. And then I'll come back on for a couple final remarks. So I am going to turn it over to Sue Wilkins. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to take a few minutes to speak with you about a very exciting project that we are currently in the process of creating. This will be a new U.S. history collection on PBS LearningMedia. It will unofficially launch in February of 2022 and will be fully completed in late fall of 2022. This collection will be a curated set of resources for middle and high school U.S. history teachers who are interested in incorporating media-rich resources in their classrooms to deepen students' understanding, not only about the major people, events, and trends in U.S. history, but also to broaden students' work with culturally inclusive resources that integrate often untold stories into the curriculum, similar to some of what you'll hear about this evening. We use often very trusted PBS programs and clips from American Experience and Frontline films, but we also have a diverse array of other media and interactive resources as well. The U.S. History Collection will help to develop students' historical thinking skills and also broaden their appreciation of history's multiple perspectives and complexity. Our resources are designed to be flexible and time efficient for you. We know you already have a lot on your plate to cover, and we feel they're easy to integrate into your existing curricula. You're looking at the prototype for the new collection. We're quite excited about this. Next slide, please. So here you're looking at sort of organization of this collection. Teachers and students will be able to search for resources in this new collection in several ways, obviously by search term, but you can also browse in one of our 17 different historical eras, which you see here on the left-hand side, or by one of 9 historical thinking skills, which you see on the right-hand side. And we believe these different search and browsing functions will make it much easier for teachers to locate the best resource for the topic that they're teaching. Next slide, please. All resources in the U.S. History collection will be accompanied by, at minimum, 2 different support materials, which you see on the far right. Teaching tips are for you, the educator. They include an essential question for the resource and supporting questions, video viewing questions, and suggestions for how you could take this further, take this topic or theme further with your students. Discussion questions are for students, and they focus on higher order critical thinking questions that students can answer after interacting with the media. They're a perfect sort of homework assignment if that suits your needs. All of the support materials that have been developed for the Unresolved Interactive, which you're going to be hearing about tonight, and we're so excited for you to learn about, will be available in the U.S. History collection. So thank you so much for letting me tease you a little bit about that. And I'm going to turn things over now to Erika Howard from Frontline.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really happy to be here to share about the Unresolved project. Unresolved is a multi-platform initiative that tells the stories of lives cut short, and a federal effort to re-examine more than 150 cold case murders that date back to the civil rights era. Most of those who were killed were Black, some were not, and many of them were victims of a campaign of racist terror that was unleashed across the United States. Next slide, please. Before I get into the details of the project, I thought it'd be important to let you know who is actually behind the project and introduce you to our team of storytellers, reporters, producers, editors, and developers who worked really hard behind the scenes. And Unresolved was born out of the vision of Carla Boras, who is one of our senior producers who leads our digital initiatives, our interactive and innovative projects. And so Frontline has produced digital projects previously. However, this is our first effort with merging investigative journalism, history, art, and technology. And also given the history of the subject matter that we'd be telling, we specifically knew that we'd be dealing with difficult areas of race relations. That would be at the center. So it was important to be mindful and inclusive about who would help bring this project to life. And this same ethos is also lived out across the board for our staff throughout the organization. Next slide, please. We also brought together an advisory council consisting of some incredible thinkers on race, journalism, academia, some from the art world, and the justice system to advise on the project. We realize that there are those who have been working on such subject matter for decades, and that it would be wise to engage with them for their expertise and to work as a collective. Next slide, please. So this gives a little bit about the stories of Unresolved. As part of the project, we made available to the public for the first time a comprehensive interactive list of the civil rights cold cases that were examined by the Department of Justice under the Emmett Till Act. This act was brought forth by the late Congressman John Lewis, and the list stands at 152 names. Numbers are important, but names even more so. And we wanted the public to know the names behind the numbers and to know the stories of each person and to recognize them in the fullness of their humanity, similar to what we do today when we hear the names of George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Taylor. So at the heart of the project, there has been a drive to center the voices of the family members of those who are on this list. And those family members have had a very harrowing experience, and for them, justice has long been denied. So Frontline also partnered with StoryCorps to record nearly 24 oral histories with these family members that are featured in the project, and those stories are being housed in the National Archive. Next slide, please. So this is a schematic to give you just a visual of the different parts of this really ambitious multi-platform effort and what the investigation consists of, which is a documentary that will be released on Frontline in mid-February of next year, a web-based interactive experience, a touring augmented reality installation exhibition, a serialized podcast, a community engagement tour, and as well as a companion education curriculum that you'll be introduced to tonight. So I'll get into some more of the components of the multi-platform elements. So if we can go to the next slide, in which I'll be talking about our podcast series. And if you can go to the next slide, this is just a visual just to illustrate how the podcast is really a multi-episode series that is hosted by a former frontline reporter, James Edwards. It's set against the backdrop of present day issues over policing, justice, and systemic racism in the US, and asks whether America's inability to confront its own historical past has kept it from moving forward. And so the podcast creates a through line between the stories of yesterday and today. And we believe the result is one that is a timely series that is both nostalgic and also urgent. Next slide, please. I'd like to share with you a little bit about the augmented reality installation. Next slide, please. So we hired a creative director. Her name is Tamara Shagalu. She's an artist, filmmaker, and technologist who leads a premier mixed reality studio that she founded. It's based in Amsterdam. And she has provided a unique vision for this augmented reality art installation. And so I'll explain briefly some of the components that it entails. And so if you take a look at the rings at the top of the installation, they represent the generational trauma that has been caused by racism that has been experienced by the families. And then hanging from those rings are fabric panels that are encased in plexiglass that are inspired by African-American quilting tradition. And so on each of these panels, you have the names of all the victims who are on the cold case list from the DOJ. They're etched in that plexiglass. Next slide, please. So for folks to experience the augmented reality, a visitor would have to download an app on their Android or iPhone. And to unlock the stories, people would have to stand around the installation, hold their phone up to the QR code. That would then open up the narrative where they would have to say the names of the victim out loud. And if you can imagine, this is a very moving experience where these names are being said out loud and their stories are being heard. And at the same time that they're being recognized, they're also being remembered and honored, which is a very vital part of this whole project. And so if we can go to the next slide, I'd like to show you a video. And you can start the video. This gives you a sense of the movement around the installation. It's currently on tour at museums around the country. Right now, it's at the 2 Mississippi museums in Jackson. The exhibition had started on the anniversary of Emmett Till's murder. And next month, it'll then travel to Chicago to the DuSable Museum, the city where Emmett Till had lived and where his funeral was held. And we all know that that really was the kickstart of the civil rights movement. And by having it go across the country, we believe that every region has a story to tell and that the project will have tremendous local community relevance nationwide. Most often it's thought of as just this is an issue of the South, but we also want to illustrate that this is an issue that affects everyone across America. Next slide, please.
Excuse me.
That's okay. So the installation made its first exhibition at the Tribeca Film Festival in June during the time of Juneteenth. It was outdoors in Battery Park. If you can imagine being open to the public, it was very moving to see people who were attending the festival participate, but also those who were just, going about their daily lives and happened upon it. So on the far left is Tamara Shagalu, in the yellow dress. She's the creative director that I spoke of. And then on the far right, we have Lynn Hammond, who is the VP of Interactive at the Tribeca Film Festival. But the real, if we can say the real stars of this image are the family members who are in the middle. These are different family members who traveled far to come to New York, and their family members' names are etched into this installation. You can go to the next slide, please. And so the families were moved very deeply, meeting one another, sharing their stories, and then also we're delighted to see the public visit the installation. And for the public, for the first time, many would learn about who their family members were. And so this experience served as a way in which their family members who were victims of racist violence would then be honored and remembered. It was very meaningful for them. And if you can go to the next slide. This is the grandson of Milton Lee Scott Sr. And if you look on the panel, you'll see that name featured in the middle. So Milton Lee Scott Sr., his wife was pregnant with Milton Lee Scott Jr. at the time that he was murdered. He never got a chance to meet his son. And looking through the card of time, his son, Milton Lee Scott Jr., has continued to try and pursue justice. Even though the case has been closed, he still would like the FBI files to be unredacted. And for this installation to be featured and for people to participate was very meaningful for him. And also to have someone like his son, Milton Lee Scott Jr.'s grandson, to be able to share into this experience of featuring and telling his story. We have the next slide, please. I'd like to tell you a bit more about our interactive experience that's available on your phone, on your laptop, your desktop. It's one where you don't have to be in the same city as installation. You can experience it anywhere. Next slide, please. And so the lead on this creative vision for the interactive is Tamara Shagalu, the same woman who developed the installation. And so when viewers come to the interactive web experience, you're going to take a journey through a forest that's going to bring out the stories of the victims, and you're going to see a lot of different symbolism. She first starts off with trees and quilts and explains further the deep resonance and meaningfulness that those trees have within the regions in which the victims were killed. And so also on the web interactive, audiences need to say the names of the people in order to unlock their stories. And so some of the names are familiar, such as Emmett Till, and some may know of James Reeb, who is a Unitarian minister who was killed right before the Bloody Sunday March on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. And then there are other folks around them who names are not as well known. There are many other people who, they were going about their daily lives as voting rights advocates. They were veterans. They were, one featured here is Louisville's first female prosecutor. They're business owners, mothers, fathers, and even children whose deaths got less attention at the time and whose lives in some ways have been all but lost to history. And so the interactive provides a deep exploration of their chronicles and their stories and a way of memorializing them. And so the next and last slide, I'd like to show you a video of what the web interactive experience is like, and we can go ahead and play that.
Mr. Speaker, the time has come for the sake of history, for the sake of justice, for the sake of closure, the 110th Congress must pass this legislation.
In 2007, Congressman John Lewis stood on the House floor to introduce a new law, the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act.
There are hundreds, maybe even thousands of these crimes that were never brought to justice. There are murders who have walked free for decades while the families of victims cried for justice. Passing this bill is the least we can do, and we must do something to right these wrongs.
The law built upon ongoing efforts within the Justice Department. Since its passage, they have examined the deaths of more than 150 men, women, and children, often victims of racist murders that occurred during the Civil Rights era. But what could justice look like in these cases decades later? This is the story of lives cut short, of families seeking justice, and the limits and failures of a federal effort to right wrongs in the country's past. Before you are 4 quilted trees. Hidden in the forest, behind each tree, is the story of a person whose case was re-examined under the Till Act. A soldier coming home to his wife. A member of the Passamaquoddy tribe of Maine. A young man whose death would spark a movement. A woman who became Louisville's first female prosecutor. Choose a tree and travel the path to bring these stories out of the shadows and into the light. When you are finished, return here. There are more stories to tell.
So we're now at the end of my segment to introduce you to the different elements of the multi-platform effort. Thank you so much for allowing me to take you on this experience and this journey. And I'd like to now introduce my colleague. Please meet educator Alysha Butler.
Thank you, Erika. Every time I see that introduction, it just gives me chills. It's just so powerful. Hello, everyone. My name is Alysha Butler. I am a 22-year veteran teacher. 2019 was a pretty good year for me because I was the Gilder Lehrman National History Teacher of the Year. I was also that same year the Daughters of the American Revolution Outstanding Teacher of American History for the District of Columbia. And I also was a DC Community Cornerstone Awardee. Next slide. Before I begin, I'd love to hear from you. I know that you all are tired, you've been at work all day, so have I, but I'd love to, before I begin, just to get a little information about who's out there. And I love to start off with something positive. In the chat, if you can, please list and describe one major obstacle you faced since returning to in-person learning, and one way you, as my students like to say, bossed up this school year. One obstacle you faced while you returned to in-person learning, and I'd love to kind of celebrate, how did you overcome that obstacle, or just give me one obstacle that you overcame. So I'll give you about a couple of seconds to put that in the chat, maybe about 30 seconds. While you all are typing away, I guess I can begin. One obstacle that I faced, I had extreme separation anxiety. I was with my 6-year-old, for 18 months here in DC. He was in kindergarten online and I was teaching, and it was just nice to kind of have him in my presence. And then it was funny seeing him go to first grade in person. It really kind of shook me, but I was able to boss up by realizing that my son was safe, and not only that, appreciating all of the students, 100 plus, that I was now going to have the privilege of seeing every day and going on a journey of learning together. All right, now that you all have kind of thought about that, giving yourself, put yourself in a positive mindset, I'm sure a lot of the obstacles that you faced and how you overcame, oh, I got one from Carrie. One obstacle that she faced is that she left the classroom and her direct work with students, and she bossed up was by taking on a role of a regional trainer for teachers. Awesome. Michael says he reestablished relationships with students, recreating the focus and the reasons for learning. Rebecca, her own chronic health issues she suffered from, but she overcame this by, let's see, can I go back? She overcame, which we were, very, very happy for. And Anthony, she said she loved returning and teaching in person and building relationships and community with students, parents, and the community as a whole. And I love it, Lauren says, so much resistance to returning, but she bossed up by learning an incredible amount of technology. I am right with you, and you're in a great place because we hope to give you some more technology, Lauren. All right, and I'm just so happy. Thank you all for putting information in the chat. For a minute, I was starting to sweat a little bit, but I kind of forgot. I know it takes a little minute to get your thoughts together and to type and put it in the chat. All right, so what I'm seeing, and you all please continue to put things in there while I wait. What I'm seeing here is that as educators, even in the face of obstacles this year and the last, we always find a way to show up. We always find a way to persist, and we always find a way to overcome. And many of us do this because we all have our why. All educators are driven by a why. My why, I grew up around 3 different generations of family members, from the Depression through the Civil Rights Movement, and all had their unique stories. And I absolutely adored and listening to, my great grandfather talking about being a rum runner and smuggling alcohol into the country during the Depression from the Bahamas where he was from. I loved listening to my grandfather, talk about being a World War II veteran fighting in a segregated unit. These were just amazing stories that made history come alive for me. The problem is that I never heard any references to their stories in school or in my textbooks. So my goal as an educator has always been, over these last 20 years, to help shed light and give a platform to the stories of the unknown and unheard voices in history, very much like my family members. Next slide. All right, well, the idea of a lot of these stories being absent from the curriculum, it wasn't just the hunch I had, it wasn't just my personal experience, it's actually rooted in fact and statistics. As a matter of fact, a 2020 CBS study that reviewed state standards revealed that 8 states don't even mention the civil rights movement, only 2 states actually mention white supremacy, only 5 states require Black history to be taught in school. And when it is taught in school, a 2016 survey conducted by the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture estimated that under 10% of total class time is actually devoted to teaching African American history. Next slide. So I'd love to, just for a second, if you can, just tell me, what's your biggest obstacle when incorporating unknown voices and narratives in your classroom? I find that A through E usually are the top ones that I see when I give seminars. So I'd love just to hear from you all out there, or see from you all out there, what's your biggest problem or just obstacle when you're seeking to incorporate unknown voices and narratives in your classroom? The poll isn't working, so it'd be great if you just throw it in the chat. Thank you, Anthony. He already put in not enough resources. I'd love to hear what other people are experiencing. C&E Lauren says, student apathy doesn't just align with the curriculum. All right, limited knowledge. I understand that. Definitely, we're not taught either. We also just don't have enough resources. Completely agree. Roxanne, just not enough time. And Andrea completely agrees with you. And I understand. I have to admit, when I get to the civil rights movement, I'm struggling. I'm trying to hurry up and get through it. And that's an awful time to kind of feel like that, because there's just so much to talk about. Finding reliable sources, says Joanna, and a lot of parent pushback I'm seeing from Carrie, absolutely, particularly in the time that we're living in, when everybody's so up in arms against CRT. I'd love to go to the next slide. If you haven't already, please continue to put it in. Last time, I'm actually going to ask you for right now to throw something in the chat. I'd love for you to tell me, even with these obstacles, what are some of your golden activities that you do or you incorporate in your unit and daily lesson activities? So what are some of your golden activities that you do that really helps you to overcome these obstacles? Do you do great warm-ups? Do you do personal, have students do personal, narratives, interviewing people that participated in history? Do you, use higher order thinking questions, the PBS seminars? All right, great. Oral histories, QFT, Sonia, awesome. Socratic seminars, Roxanne. Interactive and project-based, Anthony, yeah, I love it. Lauren says regular current events, but short in-class discussions, I love it. Robin says primary sources, that's where it's at, and connecting it to real world events. Rebecca, intentionally use literature from people of color that has moved me personally. Oh, I love that, it's so powerful. Jackie says, hey, it's all about those primary sources. Michael says higher order questions, and Joanna, she's right with the Socratic discussions to cover primary sources. Inquiries, and Carrie says, I love to start with the danger of a single story, TED Talk. Oh, use that too myself in class. I love these activities. And one of the reasons why I'm actually really psyched about the activities that you all threw in the chat is because, believe it or not, Unresolved has almost every single one of these activities that you all put in. Next slide, please. So Unresolved, I like to say, is kind of that solution to a lot of the problems we said, not having enough time, not having the resources, not having the information ourselves. Unresolved is a gold mine of stories of known and unknown individuals in history. It's that bridge to virtual learning with the incorporation of more meaningful technology and lesson activities. I had one of the attendants that put in the chat says, I overcame this by using a lot of that virtual technology that we got, while we were teaching from home, and I brought it into the classroom. I did the same thing. I have to admit, technology was not my thing at all before the pandemic. And I was sweating bullets when I realized I was going to have to boss up myself last year. And the funny thing about it is now that I'm back in the classroom, I brought in all of those, kind of technological, tips and resources, and you can find all that in Unresolved. It provides opportunity to explore the material. Students can do it on their own. And also, more importantly, it provides students an opportunity to also not only study the civil rights era, but they can also simultaneously explore current issues of police brutality in the same discussion of the civil rights era. Next slide. All right, so what is Unresolved in the classroom? How does it look? It's interactive. It provides a very comprehensive history of the civil rights era. So for that person that put in the chat, look, I don't really have a lot of the material myself or the knowledge myself. There's a lot of stuff we weren't taught. Well, Unresolved helps with that. It also encourages student-led exploration, kind of like an opportunity where you can kind of, let the students take the wheel and allow them to explore those known and unknown stories. It proves that even in death, they're still fighting for justice. The cases in Unresolved also shows our students that history is not dead. And more importantly, what I love about Unresolved, each case really helps our students to understand that we all have a responsibility to furthering the causes that came before us. Next slide. So what's in the curriculum? All right, what's in there? If you were to go to Unresolved right now and try to use in your classroom, what are some resources you're gonna have? We got warm-ups in there. We've got a very comprehensive background reading, which is actually my favorite, because instead of having a whole chapter on the civil rights movement, that could be like anywhere from 14 to 15 pages, and you can't get through it. I mean, it has it in 3 pages and it's very comprehensive. It's got group and independent activities. It's got graphic organizers, timelines, and charts that can really meet the needs of all of our students. It's got interdisciplinary lesson plans, a way for you to actually bring in your English teachers, your tech teachers, and it also has taking it further activities. Next slide. All right, so let's kind of go through the lesson. So first, the essential question is, how were the successes of the civil rights movement built off the contributions of both the known and the unknown? Specifically, our supporting questions are, how did the efforts of regular people, unknown specifically, impact the course of the civil rights movement? So the beauty about this is not just about those well-known figures, but it's also about the people that you'll never hear about. To what extent has the justice system provided justice to the families of fallen participants? For example, have the accused been arrested or convicted? Why or why not? And more importantly, it also asks our students to question, why is it important to incorporate the stories of the unknown in the history of the civil rights movement along with the known participants? Next slide. All right, so let's go through it, okay? The very first activity that we have in Unresolved is a warm-up. And I love warm-ups because I feel as a 20-year teacher, I've noticed that whenever you're introducing a new unit, or even not only that, just everyday lessons, you have to come out. I like to tell my students, like, you're coming out on the Apollo. Like, for those of you that used to watch the Apollo, a long time ago, you would have to come out, I call it the Mariah Carey note, so you don't get booed, right? You got to grab our students' attention. And I feel that's exactly what Unresolved does with the first activity. So what happens is we actually introduce our students to the picture that you have here. It's a document that's given to them, and the students read the background information. But after that, we ask them the question, what do you see? We ask our students to do that individually or with partners. And we ask them, what do you think the individuals in the picture are doing? Focus on one individual from the picture and answer the following questions. How old do you think that person is? What do you think motivated them to join the march? What risk or cost do you think followed their involvement? What impact do you think their involvement had on the movement as a whole? Could the movement have succeeded without? Could you have done what they're doing in the picture under those circumstances? Why or why not? And why should we work hard to know their story like we know the stories of other well-known activists? I love this image because it really, makes the students stop for a minute and actually take a look at the image, put yourself in the image, ask them, could you do what these people are doing? Focus on one person. And that's exactly what Unresolved does. So I'd love for you for a minute just to take a look at the image yourself. I'm sure most of us have seen it. If others have not, that's fine. I'd love for you all to just take a look at the questions and ask yourself, how could this activity maybe gain the interest of your students and set the tone for the lesson? So if you can, I'd love to hear from you one more time. If you throw it in the chat, that would be great. How do you think this activity would gain the interest of your students? How do you think it would set the tone for the lesson as a whole? All right, I love Andrea. She says, making history personal and help them to gain empathy. Absolutely. Carrie says, the image makes them curious. I think it all taps into background and prior knowledge while setting a purpose for learning. By using a photo, we're granting access to the content for all scholars. I love that. Absolutely. Some people may say that the tone might be a little frightening at first. Absolutely, definitely. Students will definitely have the opportunity though to make meeting personal. Like Anthony says, yeah, I totally agree with you on that one. Absolutely. It reminds us of contemporary images. Oh, absolutely. Of recent protests. Our students of this generation will perhaps really identify with this image more because of what has happened to them the last summer and what they've witnessed. I love what Joanna says, to get the concept across that history itself is all a collection of these very human moments. It's very individualized. Absolutely. And this is just a precursor of really what this interactive does for our students. Excellent. I love that Chelsea says these are some really good questions. It draws them into the lesson and they do not have to know the content. Absolutely. Make connections. Great. Next slide. So that's how we start off. And then what we force our students to do is take a closer look. A lot of our students might have seen that image, particularly with Ava DuVernay and her movie Selma that's come out, but few students have actually heard of Bloody Sunday in Selma, right? Even fewer can identify the image associated with the march. And I would argue that even fewer know the inspiration for the march. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, Jimmy Lee Jackson is the inspiration for the march. He was the reason for it, his murder. Can we go on to the next slide? And so what we tell our students is that now that you've studied the image, now you're going to log on to the interactive. You're going to listen to the introduction, the same introduction that Erika was able to take you all through. They're going to travel through the forest until they actually get to Jimmy Lee Jackson's tree, and it's number 3. So after analyzing the image, they go on to the interactive, they go through the introduction, they go specifically to Jimmy Lee Jackson's tree, they click on it, and they listen and travel through his case, his story. So now the students have the opportunity to find out, okay, I'm intrigued by this photo. Why did this photo occur? What was happening? What was the inspiration for? What was the motivation before it? And as they're going through this interactive, they basically complete the section of their graphic organizer as they listen to this story, to the story of Jimmy Lee Jackson. Next slide. And this is exactly what the chart is going to look like. The question that they're going to be answering as they go through his story. Who, was Jimmy Lee Jackson, right? How did he contribute to the movement or fight for social injustice? Were the assailants ever brought to justice? Why or why not, right? And the next question that they're going to ask themselves on the chart is, why is their story important to the narrative of the civil rights movement? So now someone like Jimmy Lee Jackson, who they might not have ever known about, but they might have seen that picture, now they're able to tie them both together. And what I love about the graphic organizer is that this is a learn about, his story and life and not just in death. They acknowledge that the families are still grieving. And more importantly, what they realize by doing this activity is that his death wasn't that long ago. And then after they're done with Jimmy Lee's section, the teachers and students can review and discuss it. So this is kind of like, a guided practice. This is the first case that they're going to go through. And now we'll kind of like debrief when everybody's done. Kind of like the I do, you do, then we do. Next slide. Now, after they do that, after we learn about Jimmy Lee Jackson and how he was the inspiration for, the march that they saw, Bloody Sunday, now we have them connect the dots, okay, by giving them this background reading. So we tell them that, this instance, this case that you just read about had a long history to it, right? A history that goes all the way back to Reconstruction. And so you give them this background reading. And this is the reading that I was saying was kind of gold in the sense that, instead of having to go through a whole chapter, which you just don't have time, right? You have a very comprehensive background reading that does it in 3 pages. It starts from Reconstruction all the way through the Civil Rights Movement and today. It's got a social question there. It's divided into sections to make it easier for the students to read and to kind of focus on what they should be looking for. And also, in addition to that, all the vocabulary terms are bold. Next slide. It's got a robust vocabulary. If you look at the reading, it starts from like the 13th Amendment, all the way from when slavery was abolished, all the way down to the Voting Rights Act. A lot of topics that you may not be familiar with, like the Southern Manifesto is in there. The Montgomery Improvement Association, a little bit more information about that. The history of the SCLC, Freedom Riders, 16th Street church bombing, Freedom Summer, NAACP, Plessy versus Ferguson. And this is just a snapshot of some of the vocabulary that's in that very comprehensive reading. Next slide. And as they're reading, because we know a lot of our students need some way to kind of like process what they're reading, at the same time, we give them a timeline, and it's a cause and effect historical, timeline, which is great because it helps them not only just read, but the major events that they should know about, Reconstruction all the way to Civil War. They're able to, fill out on this timeline, but it's not just a timeline of, okay, what was the event and what happened? No, we really want to make sure we're testing for comprehension. So it's an interactive timeline, which is cause and effect. Sometimes you'll have the cause, like for example, the Congress passes the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. What was the effect of that? They got to go to the reading to pull that out. So it's really making sure that they're learning as they're reading. World War II soldiers return home from World War II in 1945. What's the effect of that? And how does that, impact the Civil Rights Movement? It really helps with our SPED students and students with individualized education plans. And the beauty of this is that you could use this timeline in a regular class or an AP class for the Civil Rights Movement. Next slide. And so after we've got a comprehensive understanding of the Civil Rights Movement as a whole, then you can tell them that, all right, now what we're going to do is you're going to learn about others like Jimmy Lee that were also a part of this movement who had an impact. And students will be given an interactive map directory of Unresolved with the names of all the historical figures on each leaf and each tree. And they could do this independently. They could do this in groups, have students explore the interactive and search at specific individuals from number 1 in the before reading activity, whose lives made a significant impact on the Civil Rights Movement. You can do it in groups. And while exploring the website, students record their findings in the graphic organizer. So you see Jimmy Lee Jackson is already there. That's because that's the one that we all did together. And then it's blank. So the students are able to kind of go through the interactive. This is when you kind of like take the reins off and let them go and explore and then come back and report, what are some other known and unknown people that you learned about. If you have specific people, like, famous people that you definitely want them to know about, you can definitely, have it filled in yourself or tell them these are the ones that I want you to take a look at. So it really kind of works for, whatever you're trying to accomplish and whatever you have time for as well. Next slide. All right, so the interactive directory, these are just a snapshot of the names, that's there. Maceo Snipes, Henry T. Moore. I have to admit, when I did this, I was so shocked because some of these individuals, I'm initially born and raised in Florida, and some of these people were from Florida that I had no idea about. And I was actually angry because I never learned about them in history. But what I love about it is that, you're able to see it here. And, another thing I really like about this is that it's not just in the South. You have people also in the North as well. So it's really kind of like different geographic areas that you'll find represented in this directory. Next slide. So taking it further, all right, we're kind of winding down. If you didn't just want to stop just with the graphic organizer in that discussion, you can have a Socratic seminar. Like we said in our earlier part of the presentation, a couple of people said they'd like to use Paideia seminars and Socratic seminars. After completing the graphic organizer, you can ask the students, how did the sacrifices of regular people impact the course of the Civil Rights Movement? To what extent has the justice system provided justice to the families? Explain why it's important to incorporate that individual story and the history of the Civil Rights Movement along with well-known participants. And has the US justice system in its present form really offered justice to victims of the civil rights era? Next slide. So in addition to that, if you wanted to, take it further even more so, you can have students create a class newspaper, have the students do their own student podcast. You can have the students engage in debates, and here are some of the topics. Can the US justice system in its present form offer justice to victims of the civil rights era and victims of current civil rights violations? My favorite question, was the US justice system really designed with the ability to protect minorities? And to what extent has the government's ability to protect minority civil rights increased since the civil rights era? And this is where you can definitely bring in the examples of police brutality. As a matter of fact, all of them actually are ways you can bring in what's happening today with police brutality, because police brutality discussions center around the fact that a lot of people argue that the victims their civil rights are being violated. I love the student podcast. You can select one of these stories that the kids really loved. You can have them on their cell phones. They can record a podcast teaching their peers more about this person and why they need to know about them. You can elicit the help of the English teacher and have these students take some of these stories and put it in a class newspaper and have the English teacher help and circulate it around the school. So it's just one of the ways that you can get the students kind of energized and active, and show them that they have a responsibility to tell their peers about many of the people who made sacrifices that enable us to be where we are today. Next slide. Do we have any questions? I know I went a little quickly, but I was trying to make sure that I hit all of my slides before time ran out. Are the lessons you're showing available yet, or are they part of the February launch? I don't know if anyone can help me when exactly will it be available?
Frontline, it's anytime that you're ready. I mean, it's fine if it coincides with Black History Month, but it doesn't necessarily have to be so. I mean, Black History Month is definitely a convenience, but at the same time, we do want to illustrate that this is not just Black history, but American history. So it can be available at any time that that you all are ready to launch.
We're planning to publish in early November. So we're publishing ahead of the conference at NCSS. So for NCSS, this will all be published.
Thanks, Elizabeth. All right, and if there are no further questions, I will pass it along. Thank you all so much. You've been a great audience. I was a little nervous no one was going to participate because I know it's late at night, you all. So I appreciate just your energy and throwing your answers in the chat. Thank you for not leaving me out here by myself.
Wonderful job. Thank you so much. And a lot of excitement is building about these resources and the completeness of them and how the project that they're coming from and how they are being created by a teacher who really knows how you need to teach. So thank you, Alysha. I have not been following the chat, but I assume that there are lots of links that have been posted in the chat. And we have the information from Elizabeth, who's a senior producer, that the resources will be up on PBS LearningMedia in early November in advance of the NCSS conference. And don't forget about that panelist session we have at the NCSS conference too. All right, we are winding down. I just wanted to remind you about pbslearningmedia.org. I don't think I mentioned the fact that the site is free. Every part of it is free. There's no premium version that we charge for. Thousands of resources for K-12 across the curriculum. And again, this is where you will find the classroom resources that you just saw Alysha describe. They will be housed here, as well as the new U.S. history collection that Sue talked about at the top of the program. I wanted to just give you a snapshot of a couple of other collections that I think might be of interest to you as social studies teachers, and these three are, of course, all related to civil rights: Freedom Riders, Civil Rights Then and Now, and the African Americans. Many Rivers to Cross collection. So a collection in our world of PBS Learning Media is a curated group of resources that are all available on one page on the site. And you can search by collection. So you can put your topic of civil rights in the search window, and then you can filter your search by collections. And that's a wonderful way to really start to build your folder and your favorites of resources and get a feel for what is on the site. These are just some examples of other collections that are on the site. Of course, we are drawing from American Experience, which is produced by GBH, and also Frontline. Hundreds of short clips that are carefully edited to address a standalone, tell a story from full-length programs of American Experience and Frontline, and then contextualized with support materials similar to what you saw that Alysha showed you. Life During World War II is an example of a collection that relies heavily on primary sources and artifacts. Very interactive, and that's an example of a collection that has nothing to do with a show that's on public television. So the resources on PBS Learning Media are coming in part from what you see on television or other screens, and then other independent projects. The Writing in U.S. History is another collection that is an independent project, and this is one of my favorites. It's been around for a few years, but it remains, I think, very pertinent. There are 6 interactive lessons on U.S. history topics, and the student is one-to-one with the screen, moving through a series of slides, interacting with primary sources, video, saving notes, culminating in a final project. All right, we would love you to help us do better and complete a very brief survey at the end of this. This is the URL that I'm sure Angelica will post in the chat. At the end of the survey, you can download a certificate to acknowledge that you participated tonight, if that's of interest to you. We do, the research department handles the survey. It can be anonymous. We take your feedback very seriously and make adjustments accordingly. So thank you for that. GBH Education is active on social media. We also, in addition to social media, we do send out emails announcing things like tonight's session and future webinars and new resources as they come up on the site. So if you're not already on our email list, please join our email list. I'm sure Angelica will post the link to that in the chat, or you're always welcome to email me, Carolyn_Jacobs@wgbh.org. All right, before we sign off and thank everybody, I want to give our presenters another opportunity if they have anything to add or if something has come in the chat in the meantime. So Erika or Alysha, feel free to come back on camera if you'd like, and we'll keep the chat open for a few more minutes. Okay, I'm back because Alysha and Erika, if you're still in the room and you have anything to add, feel free to do so. Otherwise, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to Ashante from NCSS for joining us. We love collaborating with NCSS, and we're looking forward to the virtual conference and more webinars with you. Thank you to Erika Howard, the impact producer with Frontline, and the whole Frontline team responsible for Unresolved. And thank you, Sue Wilkins and Alysha on the social studies team for wonderful, wonderful work. Good night, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening, although it's probably bedtime for many of you. And I will keep the chat open for a couple more minutes and then wish you a lovely evening. Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Joanna, I see that you had a question for me. If you want, I don't know if you want to take yourself off mute and ask, or if you want to throw it in the chat, whichever one makes you feel more comfortable. Or if you want to throw it in the chat, I'm here too. I'll be on until Elizabeth closes this out. I mean, Ms. Carolyn closes this out.
You're welcome to post a question in the chat, and if we don't get back to you this evening, we'll get back to you individually.
Someone just asked in the chat or posted in the chat that they kind of left and came back in. They can't see the resources. All right, as Angelica put it in, all the resources can be found in the bit.ly that is in the chat right now. Will you also send that out to participants later, just in case?
Yes, what happens is that there's an email that will go out tomorrow, and it arrives about the same time as the webinar. It comes from Zoom. And I add in that thank you for attending webinar email, the links to the slides, the link to the resource document that has all of the links that we referenced tonight, and also the link to the survey. And also the link to the recording, because the recording file will be ready tomorrow and posted on our YouTube channel. So all of those links come out tomorrow. But regardless, you have my email here, and a large part of my morning after a webinar like this is it's always a pleasure to hear from people and have them ask me, where's the recording? Can I get it? Where's the survey? Whatever. So feel free to email me. And again, you should get an email tomorrow night with everything in one place.
I saw a question from Joanna, if you're still out there. I know that you had a question regarding Native Americans. There's a case on Unresolved of one of the trees actually is the story of a Native American man that was actually killed as well. And his case is a part of the Unresolved project. So you can definitely check him out on the interactive. And I'm not sure, but I do think that PBS Learning is also in the process of maybe putting together a lesson on the murder of Osage women in Oklahoma. That might be out in the future. But
Wow.
definitely, you should definitely take a look on Unresolved because there is an existing case on the interactive.
Thank you, Alysha.